When setting out to do this series of videos, my intention was to clear my backlog of games out and catch up on Hallmark PlayStation titles that I had yet to experience. But it only felt right to start with the game series I was already familiar with that, to me, was synonymous with the PlayStation. Spyro the Dragon. Spyro the Dragon was developed by Insomniac Games for the first PlayStation and released on September 10, 1998 in North America. Spyro came about after the release of Insomniac Games' first title, Disruptor. Mark Cerny, a man well known by PlayStation fans, tasked the development studio to create a 3D platformer that would ultimately boast engaging interactions with enemies, all the while being an appealing title for a younger audience. Craig Stitt, known at the time for his artistic contributions to titles such as Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and Comic Zone, suggested that Spyro be a dragon, and that got the ball rolling at Insomniac Games. Development began in 1997, and the game released a year later. These days, that would be a major warning sign for a flagship system seller, but at that time, that was no indication to the game's quality. So, speaking of the game's quality, that's the perfect segue to get into things. You know, I still faintly remember my parents bringing home our PlayStation from a Sam's Club, alongside Spyro the Dragon. I had the Sega Dreamcast with titles such as Sonic Adventure and Crazy Taxi, so my dad insisted the PlayStation would be his system. Well, that didn't last long as his interest faded relatively quickly, so I took the system over. And here I am, years later, looking back on it. Let's start off with the very simple plot. The game opens with an interview for a TV show of some kind. It's never explained. The adult dragons are shit-talking Nasty Nork, some big green dude who's locked away in another world. This big dragon calls him simple and ugly, so Nasty somehow magically turns them all to stone with his scepter. Okay, immediately, a couple things here. One, if Nasty Nork just gallivants around with a scepter that can magically turn people to stone just by urge of will, no matter how far away they may be, that's kind of a huge deal. Just imagine the implications of that. This fucker is treating this shit calmly. Secondly, with all that power in his hands, he could have done this at any time. Nasty Nork only takes action after being trashed on public access television. Honestly, the dragons brought this upon themselves. Nasty Nork's stoner ray hits every dragon in the game but Spyro, who immediately understands the task and sets out to right this wrong. Good hustle, man. With that, you're thrust right into one of the game's hub worlds, the Artisan World, and... Oh, this game doesn't have analog controls. You have to use the D-pad for a 3D game. And it actually works quite well. I was surprised by how well Spyro controls. It's definitely a little iffy when you're making sharp turns while charging, but that's more on Spyro's control itself than the control scheme. Other than that, Spyro actually feels pretty good to play. You can walk, hold down the square button to charge with your horns, jump with X and hit X again to glide, then press circle to shoot flames. To me, that's one thing Spyro had over all the other platformer mascots. He can shoot fire, that's awesome! Oh, and there's also a roll move that I completely forgot existed until I'd already finished the game and sat down to write and record this review. I'm not going to capture footage of it, it's pretty useless. Let's bring up that little dragonfly that's zooming around with Spyro everywhere. That's Sparks, and he serves as your health indicator. When he's gold, you've got 3 hits left. When blue, you've got 2. When green, you've got 1. And after that, Sparks is gone, and you're on your own and vulnerable to 1 more hit. You can replenish your health by beating up cute animals, like these sheep, that leave a butterfly behind them. Huh. Sparks eats the butterfly, regains some health, boom, good to go. The game of Spyro itself is pretty simple. Hub world by hub world, level by level, you'll go through and free all 80 dragons from Nasty Nork's spell. Collect all the dragon's treasure gems that Nasty has stolen, and... well, that's it. Stone dragons are never really tough to find, some gems are a little tricky to get, but not really hard, and basically if you do a good solid sweep of every area in the game, there's really nothing stopping you from fully completing the game, other than your own lack of drive. There are also these dragon egg thieves, who will pretend aren't a racist caricature. They run away from you on sight and taunt you, which makes them very satisfying to torture or ram into. That little bit of explanation basically tells you the entire game of Spyro. You'll jump, glide, and charge your way to new areas. Some enemies you'll need to use your fire breath on, while some enemies have metal armor that can't be affected by heat, so you'll need to charge them. It's usually rather intuitive as to what moves you'll need to use on each enemy. The game quickly teaches you that larger enemies are more likely weak to fire, and that smaller enemies usually need to be dispatched with your horns. There are a few enemy types that will make you question the method of defeat. To me, in this instance, that's smart design and something I really appreciate. Bosses, on the other hand, aren't completely memorable in their strategies to defeat them, but they do have a charm to their own. There's a few sheep on stilts disguised as a living jack-o'-lantern, and a crazy voodoo dude with fireproof armor, for example, but they just don't feel very rewarding to defeat. The worst example of that is easily Nasty Nork himself. There's 3 phases to this fight. In the first phase, you chase 2 different egg thieves around who are each carrying a key. You get those keys, and proceed to the second phase. In the second phase, Nasty runs away from you, and you have to catch up to him and shoot him with fire. Once. In the third phase, Nasty runs to a corridor of platforms that are slowly receding into the wall over a lava pit. Cross the platforms in time, hit Nasty with your flame once, and he's defeated. It's not fulfilling and is honestly just an exercise in frustration, making the game end on a bit of a down note. Now graphically, while Spyro is an early 3D game, it has the benefit of a great color usage and an impressive rendering technique for the PlayStation 1, resulting in a visual style that, while definitely aged, is also appealing. You'll definitely never forget you're playing an older game, but that's not a knock against Spyro. The music is well known for being by the Police's drummer Stuart Copeland, and that's where we hit the area of the game that has always stuck with me the most. Spyro has very unique music styling, a bunch of standout organs and percussion flourishes with some decent electric guitar synth that to this day still helps to give the game a very unique identity. While not every track is as catchy as others, the style is very consistent and definitely creates an atmosphere that ranges from fun to foreboding. I personally consider Spyro to have one of the better game soundtracks. To wrap it back around to the levels, in each hub world there are a set of portals that will take you to different worlds. There's some grassy areas, mountainous areas, a few swamplands, an ice area or two. It doesn't often feel like you're just hitting a checklist of generic platformer tropes, so kudos to the designers on that. Levels generally aren't very big, they're usually more confined playgrounds. Playtime in each level is dependent on the player, but the levels are designed in mind with the player searching out every single gem in Dragon in every nook and cranny. And with that, we hit another negative snag. To put it bluntly, Spyro the Dragon doesn't have that much variety with its gameplay. Enter a level, use the same moves to traverse each and every level, hunt down dragon statues, search the environment for treasure, beat baddies, then leave. Now, you can absolutely boil down any video game to that simple of a level. However, with Spyro, that repetitive nature really starts to show itself after the first few hours. The game isn't very long. I mean, you can see the credits in about 4 to 5 hours, and full completion can bump that up to about 6 or 7 if you're good. Now, occasionally the game does throw you a curveball, like a speeding section or the game's speedway levels where you actually fly around in a timed course destroying objects. But they don't do much to alleviate the tedium the game passes on to the player as they delve more into the game. But that's really my main complaint other than the meh boss fights. All in all, Spyro controls well enough for a first entry in the series, the enemies are fun enough to fight and interestingly designed, levels are laid out well enough and for the most part complement Spyro's abilities, atmosphere is nice, music is great. Honestly, what I took away the most from the game this time around is just how chill it is. The game's not very hard, the gameplay doesn't change very much. This is the perfect game to kick back and play for a few hours when you just want to chill and scratch that collectathon itch. Spyro 1 just has a very unique feel to the rest of the series, and when I talked about playing the game on Twitter, more than a couple people told me they actually prefer Spyro 1 to the other games for its unique vibe. I say that if you're a fan of 3D platformers and you somehow missed out on Spyro, you definitely need to give it a look, and you can safely start with the first game and have a great time. The game is a pretty reasonable price on eBay right now, but you won't be missing anything by playing the digital version on the PS3 or Vita like I did for this video. So, I like Spyro a lot. It was great to revisit this game, and while I felt it did fall a bit short in a few certain areas, on the whole I found the game to be a decent trip down memory lane, and it surprised me how much I enjoyed the game this time around. Next up will be Spyro 2, Ripto's Rage. Or Gateway to Glimmer if you're in Europe. Not really sure why they changed that name, but who am I to judge? That said, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Learning to Love PlayStation.
Wow, I never thought I'd be rescued, especially by such a little dragon. What I mean is, I always believed in you, Spyro.
You gotta believe.
You gotta do what? I gotta believe.